Welcome to See View Circle, a podcast in which your hosts, that's us, Doug and Brady, will be recapping and reviewing our favorite TV shows and movies of the past, present, and hopefully the future, all in service to our end goal of determining just how highbrow or lowbrow our viewing taste really is. My name is Brady.
And I'm Doug.
We'll tell you more about ourselves a bit later on, but for now, Doug, can you let our listeners know why the podcast is called See View Circle?
Sure. So if you found your way to our debut episode, chances are you're already a super fan of Knots Landing, the beloved nighttime serial that began airing in 1979. That is 45 years ago, kids.
What?
And it ran for a total of 344 episodes well into the 1990s. If this is you, then you already know that Seaview Circle is the name of the fictional cul-de-sac where core characters from Knots Landing lived and loved.
And oh, did they love.
And since Knots is the first series that we'll be covering, we thought Seaview Circle a fitting title for the podcast as a whole.
A circle, though, Doug, when there are only two of us doing the seeing and viewing?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Brady, because we hope to add others into the circle for future episodes by inviting other fans of Knots Landing, or even total virgins who've never even heard of it, to sit in on choice episodes and provide their reviews.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Are you really both going to commit to covering all 14 seasons, 344 episodes of the series? If we were to air them weekly, we won't be done until the 2030s.
I might be dead by then.
I think we all might be from the way big business plumbs the environment, causing ever-increasing climate change. But more on that in next week's episode.
So we're hoping to publish new episodes every Thursday night at 10 p.m., which is the original airtime of Knots Landing during its run on CBS.
And while the goal is to cover every episode of Knots Landing, in addition to other fave TV series, one-off eps and movies as well, we will only be able to accomplish that with your support. So whatever platform you may be using to listen right now, please subscribe to our podcast, rate us.
Rate us highly.
Yes.
I stress.
Yes, and like the show. Share it with friends who may also be fans of this classic series that is the only one from its era to last 14 years.
But why, Brady, are we starting a new podcast of a show that hasn't been on the airwaves for decades?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Doug. Because after what seems like an eon of fans debating back and forth why the series had never been released for streaming, the powers that be, namely Warner Brothers, CBS, OMR, they finally cut through all the red tape. And now, interested parties may watch all 14 seasons of Knots Landing on Plex. No, to be honest, we haven't actually tried this out yet because we had the first two seasons on good old-fashioned DVD.
And I hope our player will hold out for the long run on this one.
Well, there's only one way to find out, Doug. Let's pop in a disc and get this show on the road.
And so begins the first episode titled Pilot. A nice coincidence since this is also our pilot episode.
Oh, we should mention that our podcast is, the format is not watch along. We're actually going to be recapping scene by scene, giving final thoughts on each episode, its highs, its possible lows. And then in the end, we're going to break out our trusty brow meter to find out just how lowbrow or highbrow the episode is. Now that disclaimer intact, for this first episode, let's at least watch the intro to find out who our cast of players are.
Let it rip.
What did you think of this this intro?
Oh, I thought this intro was actually really unusual, to be quite honest, because it's, very out of character.
Yeah, it was a bit awkward
to what I remember. Definitely cheesy, and
I mean, I think they were trying to. They didn't quite know what they were selling at this point because obviously there was probably only a few episodes in the can. But it just seems like doesn't quite fit with what we know the series to be. Eventually.
Yeah, I thought it was a little strange compared to, seeing the rest of the series, seasons. But, I guess that's the way they had to roll to get it going.
I mean, it fits somewhat in with what the creators.
Well, now here we go. Here's the title sequence. This is the real deal.
Okay, so this was created by Wayne Fitzgerald, I think is the name. And it's obviously pieced together from different shots and different locations, or at least we know that now, but maybe back then we would have been fooled.
Well, I mean, that's what's so funny is, I can talk about this later, that I grew up near the Seaview Circle, but I didn't watch this when I was a kid, so I was not aware.
Right. Well, you wouldn't know what a bird's eye view, is back then, like where this was.
Exactly.
So here we're being introduced to our 4 different couples and our cast.
And now we get the names and the characters. So we have James Houghton as Kenny Ward.
The lovely Kim Langford as Ginger Ward.
Michelle Lee as Karen Fairgate.
Oh, my favorite. Constance McCashin as Laura Avery. Did I give too much away there?
Don Murray as Sid Fairgate.
Oh, look at John Plachette there. He is such a dude. He plays Richard Avery.
Ted Shackelford as Gary Ewing.
And of course, Joan Van Ark is Valine Ewing.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's creator David Jacobs. Now, we should say that David Jacobs created this based off of a movie, and we'll get into this more in depth later, but the movie was called Scenes of a Marriage. So that was the concept.
And wasn't that a Swedish film or Swedish TV?
Yeah, it was a Swedish film. We'll talk about it more in the next episode, but basically that's why you see the 4 couples in those different homes on that cul-de-sac in that opening.
And so, anyway, the pilot, I want to give you the synopsis according to IMDb, is as follows. Gary and Valine Ewing move to the cul-de-sac. Sid's daughter from his first marriage is visiting, and she brings a lot of emotional baggage.
Yeah, you could say that.
Now, the writer of this episode is the series creator, David Jacobs, and the director is Peter Levin. Our episode guest stars include Dallas good guy Patrick Duffy as Bobby Ewing, and also, unbelievably, Karen Allen as Sid's daughter, Annie. Now, we're not going to get too far into the Dallas connection right now, but we promise to cover more about the origins of the spinoff in our next episode.
Okay, so the first scene, we have Sid coming home sick from work, and let me just tell you, I can relate because I have been sick for most of the past week and I'm over it. So I can see why he's over it too. One thing I'll say about it that I thought was really cool was that, again, this David Jacobs idea here was Scenes from a Marriage. He wanted something to be very real and very relatable. And so to have a pilot episode where one of the main characters just has a cold is, I think, very real.
Yeah, I think that's what always struck me about this show. What I like about it is there's always an element of reality in it, which you never see in any other television shows for the most part.
At least not from that era. Maybe now so you do see that more, but back then I feel like everything was really meant to be more sensationalistic or, kind of...
Yeah, and I mean, I'll elaborate later. I know there's something else that I remember seeing in this episode that I was like, oh, that's interesting. But the one thing I thought what was really funny about this one was it was kind of cheeky as well, how they led you down this path, because when Sid opens the door, he sees a picture of Karen on the mantle, and then you hear the noises coming from the bedroom, and then immediately you think, oh boy, we're in for it, like she's having an affair. And, do you want to...
Well, before we get to that, I just want to say that first shot, I think is PVE, right? When he's driving in on that curve.
Yeah, it's definitely Palos Verdes Estates for those who don't live in California.
And I think that is technically where Knots Landing is supposed to be.
Yeah, that was always what I gather from all those cutaway shots. Are always usually filming down in Palos Verdes or like Redondo Beach.
Yeah, and so if you're not from the Los Angeles area, PVE or Palos Verdes Estates is kind of south of Los Angeles. Really, it's on the coast, and it's kind of like a little, I don't know, not really a peninsula, but kind of.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's those it's the beach areas that are close to like Manhattan Beach and that whole area. So it's a different vibe
for sure,
completely to metropolitan Los Angeles. It's totally like another world. But anyway, it's not that far. But it is funny how they put it together.
They go right into the cul-de-sac, which was filmed in Granada Hills, and we'll talk more about that later. But in that first shot, we see Laura. We meet Laura for the first time, and she's talking to her son, Jason. And there are some moving vans also, if you notice.
Oh, yeah.
On the street.
And one thing I did...
Oh, wait. I forgot.
What? What's that? Oh, there's a letter here.
Yes, this is a letter. This is a long-lost letter.
This is a letter.
This is the first in our ongoing segment that we're going to call Letters from the Circle.
Or Letters from the Sack, as in cul-de-sac, okay?
Letters from the sack.
The sack.
That does have a certain je ne sais quoi to it. Well, let us know what you prefer, and we will make that the name of this segment going forward. Now, Doug, would you care to do the honors and read this first letter?
I don't mind reading this first letter. So this is a letter from Karen. Dear Meredith, I never thought I'd miss you as much as I do today. The neighborhood seems so quiet without you. Why did you have to move away? The moving van just pulled up to your house. I hear that a nice young couple named Ewing is moving in. Maybe I'll bring them a care package and get acquainted. You're right. Don't overwhelm them, Karen.
Karen would never do that.
She would never do that. My enthusiasm can be frightening at times. I'll control myself.
At least she knows herself well.
It's true. Still, it just won't be the same without you. Can Pittston, Pennsylvania possibly compare with Knott's Landing? Oh well, don't mind me. Funny, there was a time not so long ago when the kids took up all my time. Diana had dancing school and Eric and Michael had Little League. Now they don't seem to need old mom anymore. As soon as I realized that, I began to lavish Sid with attention. He looked at me as if I'd lost my marbles. I've never been the kind of wife who waits on her man hand and foot. Luckily for me, Sid wouldn't have me any other way.
Ooh.
So what do I do with the rest of my life? Am I doomed to live out a dull, meaningless existence in suburbia? I don't mean to make that sound so harsh. I love my husband and my kids. I love my home and my life here. Am I wrong to want something more? Maybe it's time to reevaluate where I'm going and where I've been. I need to feel challenged. You can relate to that. I'm plunging ahead to a whole new chapter in my life.
She sure is. Several, in fact.
Yes, it's scary and exciting, all at the same time. Wish me luck and keep in touch. I'm going to need all that moral support I can get. Pretty interesting.
I have just one question. Who the
bleep is Meredith? I guess Meredith lived in the old Ewing house. Now we know.
Now, before we move on, Doug, what house would we live on?
Oh, I think we would probably live in...
We live in the house to the other side of the Ewings. Right. Okay, back to the episode. So Sid comes home. He has a cold. He checks his mail. He looks at his family in the photos. And then he hears that noise. He goes upstairs and he finds someone in his own bed.
And we're led to believe that Karen, his wife, because we've seen the picture of her, is having an affair or something. But then...
I mean, what a terrible way to come home after having a cold. Right?
Yeah. And so basically then the door opens and then we see this woman obviously we haven't seen any of these characters before, but she's certainly not in the title sequence.
Right. So back outside, we see some other new characters arrive. It is Gary and Val Ewing being escorted by brother Bobby to their new home on Seaview Circle.
And Bobby is Patrick Duffy. So for those of not seen Knott's Landing, but have seen Dallas, you instantly recognize him.
Right. Now, I found out that this pilot for this show was filmed in March of 1979, and this particular scene outside was Ted and Joan's very first scene shot for Knott's Landing.
Oh, okay.
I guess the pilot was eventually picked up by CBS, and it was scheduled as a mid-season replacement. The debut was actually on December 27th, 1979. So that makes this the only Knott's episode to air in the 1970s, though I guess you could argue that several more were produced and filmed in the months leading up to 1980. Now, did you catch Valine's gloves?
Yes, I thought that was really weird. She's got white gloves on as she's looking, through the fence at the house.
She's moving in with white gloves. But I guess that's kind of like shows kind of what her character is, right? She's more of I don't want to say, naive, but yeah, she comes from a background where, she grew up in, Tennessee or something like that. So she's kind of wide-eyed coming here to California.
Oh, I mean, basically, I'll kind of give my take on her throughout the podcast. But, my initial thing that I really felt that was driven home to me, especially in the first episode, is definitely how green she is. She's so green. She's completely got Arrested Development. She's She is a child as well.
Yes, and I think that actually really plays into the plot and character development in this episode.
Yeah.
You'll see it well, we don't want to get too much into it. Let's keep carrying on.
Yeah, let's keep going.
But basically, so Bobby drops them off. He gives some exposition about what's going on here. So basically, Gary and Val have recently gotten remarried, and Gary and Bobby's mother has basically given them, this new couple, bought them this house and all the furniture in it.
Right. So they're starting a brand new life here in California.
And then who comes running up?
Oh, I love it. Karen, of course, comes and meets them. You know, pushy but friendly.
Yes.
I mean, pushy
she is wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. She is ready to meet the neighbors.
Yeah, and she...
So long, Meredith.
Yeah, bye, Meredith. We don't care about Meredith anymore.
So immediately, she's like inviting them over for dinner on their very first night in town. Like they don't have a million things to do.
Right. She's like, oh, well, you've got to come over for dinner tonight. It's just like, I don't know about you, but I mean, the few times that we've moved, I mean, we're a complete hot mess for like 2 weeks trying to put everything back together, you know?
Now, did you notice she also mentions the Fairgate dog? What dog?
Yeah, I've never seen a dog in this show.
No, it's funny because you can barely hear it, but in the scene later on in the episode, Richard actually references the dog. Like he's off camera and he says to Sid something like, "Hey Sid, I want to talk to you about your dog." That was really funny, and I think it's like an ad lib, probably in a crowd scene. But anyway.
You know what I thought was really funny was that Karen made a Brady Bunch reference, which I thought was really...
yes, another show that we absolutely love here at Seaview Circle.
Yes, so, maybe that'll show up later on in another time.
Right. So then it transitions, basically, back over to the Fairgate house, and Sid is throwing out this dude onto the street.
Yeah, and it's pretty shocking. And then, of course, they start arguing. And so we're getting some backstory, on Sid's daughter's character.
So basically we find out that Sid's daughter from a previous marriage is visiting the Fairgate house, and she's already been there a week, causing havoc.
Right. And of course...
we don't quite know how yet. But
yeah, but obviously Karen is like PO'd.
She's had it.
Officially. And then Karen Allen, who is playing Annie... she even says, "I haven't cried since I was 2." So then you're sitting here thinking like, okay, there's a lot of issues between dad and daughter that have not been resolved.
That amazing line? Okay, so basically, Sid, Annie's father, has caught her in his own bed, okay, with some rando dude, right? And so she comes down, Karen confronts her, and Karen says, "What if the kids had walked in?" And what does she say? "They could have watched."
Oh, yeah, that's right. She had some really good lines.
Oh, my God. That was one of my favorite lines.
And another line I liked from Karen was that she said, "She's here to punish us," which I thought was really funny.
Okay, so Annie leaves the building. Actually, she takes Karen's car, right? Which I love, right?
Which is like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a real nice move there, like showing total disrespect for her stepmother, right? So Sid and Karen go upstairs into their bedroom, and they continue to fight. And they kind of talk a little bit more exposition about how Annie is the daughter of this woman, Susan, who we have not met. And what I love about this scene is that Karen, throughout the entire argument, is holding dry cleaning in her hands. Again, it's kind of like hearkening back to this original concept of it being just very down-to-earth people doing very down-to-earth things, but then also having this drama. However, I will say that, and I will talk about this maybe a little bit more, but in this first episode, I feel like the tension between Karen and Sid is like turned way up.
Yeah, I think it's funny because obviously not seeing this show for quite a long time, I mean, I virtually didn't even remember any of this stuff. And I think it is kind of an interesting thing to review it again from the very beginning and really take a look into the personalities. And I'm sure I know it changes over time, but it's just funny to see this pilot episode.
They were definitely trying to imbue the pilot with as much kind of drama or possibility for future drama as they could, right? Because obviously they want to grab people's attention. But I don't know if you noticed throughout the episode, every single possible chance they could get at putting an innuendo of someone sleeping with someone else was put in. Every combination of character was suggested that they could sleep with each other.
Well, and what I thought was kind of funny too, even when I watched the title sequence that time, what I noticed was everybody was wearing lingerie, like every couple.
They're either
so it's like,
yes,
I think thinking about it, like going, okay, so this is the first time you're seeing Knots Landing ever. You would just think that they're going to be having a romp or key parties like every night.
Well, that totally is what I envisioned, basically. We'll get to that a little bit later on. So in the next scene, basically we carry back over out onto the cul-de-sac, and I think at this point, Bobby is leaving, and Gary is going to take him to the airport. There's some really strong accent delivery by Joan Van Ark in this episode. Obviously, her character Valine is from the South. I watched the DVD commentary about this episode, and Ted Shackelford and Joan Van Ark, they joke about her accent, like how completely strong it is. And I'm going to say the quote that Joan Van Ark said. She said, "I can't believe what I did with her."
That's funny.
Her accent fades throughout the seasons, but then it comes back.
Yeah, it does come back at certain times, depending on the drama or melodrama that we need to see. I did also, I noticed on this one was they were really tying back to Dallas again, too, because they referenced JR and Lucy again. And then it was like, don't tell Lucy that we got married.
So that's setting up some drama that will be revisited later on in the season, because basically, why is Lucy not there? This is their child, and they've just gotten remarried, and they're moving to California, and they left her behind?
Right. And they're not going to tell her that they got remarried. But anyway, I guess, for the Dallas viewer, right, that really is going to.
Well, and I'm sure that Lucy was such an integral part of that show. So they didn't want to lose her on that show. So it's like a plot point they have to kind of resolve.
Yeah.
All right. So as Bobby and Gary are leaving for the airport, we see someone else drive up, and out of the car pops this gentleman, right? Richard Avery.
Richard Avery, John Plachette.
Oh my God. He is amazing. And immediately he is snarky. Immediately he's flirting with Val.
Yeah. He is, revealing his character very early on in the show. There's no illusions at what kind of person he is. And
he basically just pushes himself into the house to see it, to take a tour, right? Yeah. And then he realizes that, I guess Valine says that she doesn't have any light bulbs because they aren't unpacked yet. So he's like, oh, don't worry, I'll be back with some light bulbs.
Yeah, it was just kind of ludicrous that he saw an opportunity.
Right.
That she's alone, and I'm going to try to make a move on her.
Yes. Meanwhile, his wife is just across the street. So yeah, basically some time passes, and Valine's sitting there on the couch, still in the dark, waiting for that light bulb. And then Gary returns home, and they have a sweet little moment. And I think this is the first time we actually see.
Yeah, they start making out, and then of course, what happens? There's a knock on the door.
Oh wait, before you say that, on the commentary, Joan and Ted, they reveal what their favorite line from this pilot episode was. And it was when Gary comes back and Valine asks, did Bobby get off okay?
Oh my God.
He didn't get off, from the airport, but they just thought that was really, really funny. And they would joke about that for years to come. So Richard comes over with the light bulb.
Yep. And you know what I thought was funny is, Gary meets him, but then he immediately forgets his name. Because he says later, he goes,
that is relatable. That is so relatable.
He said, oh, what's your name again? Or something like that. I was like, okay.
So he ratchets up the evening's plans for the Ewings another notch, because he says, after you go over to Karen's, then why don't you come over to my place and have some drinks? Which I think is, again, hilarious, because this is their first night in town and they're having to meet all these people. But obviously for the pilot, it makes sense. It's a great vehicle to meet all the people.
Oh, and this is what I thought was funny too, is Richard says, and don't let Karen analyze you.
Oh, this was great. Do you remember what he said? He described her as Lucy from the Peanuts, although he didn't say the word Lucy because that would probably confuse people because there's Lucy Ewing. But yeah, Lucy, the one who's behind the little booth, 5 cents for some psychoanalysis. I thought that was hilarious and a great way to show kind of who that character of Karen is. So how many Ewings does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Well, apparently it takes 2.
It takes at least 2. And basically, Richard's in there kind of angling already with Gary to find out what is the connection with Ewing oil. Like, there must be something going on. And that's kind of a foreshadowing to the following episode, which we'll get to in our next podcast. Okay, so back over the Fairgate house.
Yes.
Okay, so this is some more exposition setting the stage visually. We see Sid and he is hunched over a car in the Fairgate garage because he's a mechanic and also owns Knots Landing Motors, I think, which is a used car dealership, and I think he's wearing the coverall with that on the back. And
well, he's working on his vintage. I think it's a Chevy. It looked like a Chevy.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask
you.
I was going to ask you about the cars. If you ever notice a car that is like stands
well, I'm
out.
pretty sure it was a Chevy. I mean, I have to look again, but it's definitely it's like a '50s automobile that he must be restoring.
We must say, I mean, one of the reasons we love watching old vintage TV shows, specifically from the late 70s and early 80s, is we just love all the fashion and the style cues. And again, we'll talk more about that.
And the automobiles.
And the automobiles. So always dramatic. Karen is fighting with Sid. She says something like, "We won't last another week," because apparently Annie's supposed to stay with the Fairgates for 2
right.
whole weeks.
She originally she's going to come for 2 weeks, and basically I was going to say you can really see her character is she's a ball buster. She is not afraid to make waves. She's not going to like sit down and take any of this stuff lightly. She's
right, and she's very protective as a mother, which I think carries throughout her character throughout all seasons. And in this particular situation, she's concerned that her young daughter Diana is being influenced by Annie, her stepsister, who is certainly a handful and less sheltered than Diana.
Yeah,
who we will meet soon. It's funny because if you notice, Sid, he's not into it. He doesn't want to fight, so he uses the excuse of the dinner party to be like, we need to work on that. So that's the end of that. So then we cut to then there's a commercial break actually, and then after the commercial break, we are at the Fairgate family dinner where they have invited new neighbors, Gary and Val, over to meet the family.
Right, and this is the first time that we actually meet the children.
Yes, and they are with us for the most part. They're with us for quite a while.
Yeah,
and 2 of the children actually become series regulars. Do you want to talk a little bit about who you feel most akin to, Doug?
Well,
Are you more Diana or are you more Michael?
I'm a combination of Diana and Michael. No, I would say to you this. What's funny is I love Diana. What I always thought was funny is that she has such a strong New York accent.
Yes.
And we know Karen is from New York,
right.
But why does Diana have such a strong New York accent when she's probably grown up in California? But anyway,
right.
That's secondary. The only thing about Michael, though, what's funny is I would say I'm pretty sure that Michael and I are of the same age or like a year apart.
And you were living here in California at that time, so you could relate.
Yeah, and I had like blonde hair. So it's funny. It's very relatable to me being like that period of growing up in the Valley, skateboarding and all that crap.
Did you have a skateboard?
I did have a skateboard. I wasn't very good, but I did make a skateboard movie when I was about 10 years old with a Super 8 camera.
Perhaps we're going to have to rate that on the brow meter later.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to be very high on the brow meter. But anyway, it's very relatable to me. But obviously, as I said before, the thing for me was I didn't actually watch this show when I was a kid. I was watching maybe other things that weren't as adult,
Right.
I would be watching Love Boat or Fantasy Island or Donnie and Marie.
Did you know I read somewhere that Joan Van Ark was actually filming a Love Boat the same week that she had to film her first scenes as Valine. That was on Dallas. We'll talk more about that in the next episode. But anyway, back to this dining room and back to basically the Mackenzie household. I will say, to me, the decor in this house is so of the time. It is so of the era. I mean, maybe not necessarily my exact house where I grew up, but certainly houses that I would visit at the time looked just like this.
Yeah, super.
So it kind of gives me a little like warm feeling.
Super 70s house.
Yeah. So in this scene, basically, Gary and Val give a little bit more exposition about their backstory. They say that they were married before 17 years ago, which is about the age of Lucy, their child. I don't know if they mention her in this particular conversation, but if you do the math, 17 years ago means that they were teenage lovers.
Yeah, and we also get a little bit of Sid's backstory too, in this one.
Exactly, and I find it interesting how Diana, who will have this characteristic of herself in later seasons, she's definitely an instigator here because she's the one who brings up Annie. And then that's what causes Sid and Karen to fight some more about where she is.
Yeah,
what are the considerations for this child while they're having dinner and she's not there?
But pretty soon in the next scene, we will find out where Annie is. Won't we?
This is good.
Yeah, this is really great.
This is a really fun scene, basically.
So basically what we find out is that Annie goes over to Kenny and Ginger's house, and I guess they are friendly.
Already acquainted.
They're already acquainted.
She's only been in Knots Landing for a week, but Kenny clearly knows who she is.
And
she crashes the house, but he's playing music on a stereo, and so she doesn't know that Ginger's actually home. And so Kenny has to stop her before she says anything that alludes to the fact that they have already become acquainted.
Yeah. And then what I loved about this scene was, of course, like the first time seeing Kenny and Ginger's pad.
Oh my
It's like
gosh.
super 70s. You know, you've got...
It's definitely the more youthful vibe, right? So here we just saw at the Fairgates this more traditional family, and now we're seeing the young couple.
We're seeing the young 70s groovers with the stereo and the reel-to-reel.
I don't know if we know that Kenny is a music producer quite yet, but
you
it's
don't know
certainly
quite
alluded to in this scene. And there is some really bad, tepid disco playing. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to say bad, because I do think it was created by the same guy who created the theme song. Because if you look in the credits, it just says music by Gerald Immel. But I would say it's definitely a tepid, safe disco track that's playing. And I don't know if you noticed when, Annie knocks on the door or whatever, as he's walking over, he does this little dance.
Oh, yeah, he does a little dance, which was really funny. And he's got his, little kind of hipster.
It's kind of like, to me,
outfit.
kind of like a disco Han Solo outfit in a way, right?
It's cute.
Yeah.
I love the reel-to-reel. And he's got his necklace on.
Oh,
I mean, he's cool.
He's cool.
And then basically, she's pretty much coming on to Kenny right away. And then, of course, her plan is that she would like to come on to Kenny more, because Ginger is basically saying that she's going to move on over to the Avery's house.
Basically, now. Basically, somehow, like, Kenny kind of manipulates Ginger by saying, oh, Annie's really upset right now. She needs someone to talk to. Do you want to talk to her? And then Ginger's like, oh, no, but we have to go over to Richard. So then Kenny's like, okay, then you go over. I'll talk to her.
Yeah, I'll talk to her. Okay. So, of course, we're getting, we're revealing who these characters are in the pilot. It's a pretty good indication of, like, where we're going.
Right. And I will say Annie is really ballsy in this scene. I mean, she just plops down in that beanbag and she's just like,
oh, she's a great character.
What are you going to do?
I will say, I mean, I don't want to, like, do any spoilers, but I kind of wish that she had been in this series a little bit more.
I will say that
great.
When I watched this episode previously, I think she's kind of an unlikable character, right? Because she's so wild and she's causing all these problems, but I don't think I appreciated her before like I did this time.
Me too.
She was juicy. And
she's got some really great lines and comebacks.
Great lines, and also she there's an arc here to this that we'll get into, but it's actually quite beautiful. And again, like I say, the way they set up the character development really wasn't for Annie. And it really wasn't for Sid and Karen, because like we said before, I don't feel that they carry on like that. The character development is really for Valine. And we'll see that in the next couple scenes. So the next scene, we are going to go to the backyard get together over at the Averys.
And again, I'm so digging their backyard.
Obsessed.
The ferns.
Obsessed.
Those kind of like
this yellow green and white story with
the chaise. Look, the chaise, the footstool. It's classic 70s that we just don't get to see anymore.
It is so good. Like, again, this is the neighborhood I grew up in, basically. I could just see it right here.
Me too. This would have been like probably my friends around the corner.
Yeah, or like my parents' friends, right? You'd go over there for a barbecue or for the 4th of July, and this is what you'd see.
This would be what I would see at my neighbors who lived up on the hill, and their mother was a 31-year-old divorcee.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going there and just being like, wow. Like, it was like the sunken living room, that whole kind of thing. This is totally reminiscent of that.
So this scene is great because all the characters make an appearance, and basically there's a lot of kind of wheels turning here in this scene. We find out really quickly that, maybe perhaps Gary is an alcoholic.
Oh, that's right, because
he turns down an offer of booze from Richard at the outdoor bar, which of course I love.
I like the fact that Laura first meets Val at this moment, which is great. And she's like, do you have any children?
Yeah.
And,
so there you go. You see
know.
that kind of spinning. And then, of course, Richard again is asking Gary about the connections to the Ewings. And Gary says, oh, no, I don't have any business with that. I'm not involved in that. Richard mentions that Sid owns Knott's Landing Motors, which is described as the fastest growing dealership in the Southland. And he sort of intimates that maybe Gary should ask Sid about looking for a job via him. Now, did you notice, what are they listening to? Did you notice that?
No, I did not.
They're listening to classical music in this beautiful, groovy backyard party. There's Mozart playing.
Oh,
what?
Well, maybe it's royalty free.
Yes,
that's probably what it was. I don't know.
Okay, so then Ginger arrives, and I love this comment. Richard describes her as snappy Ginger, the closest thing to perfection in Knott's Landing. And he takes her over to meet the ladies. And then Richard talks about Kenny and Ginger, how they got married on an incoming wave because Kenny was born on a surfboard.
Right, and that he was raised in California and that he's also in the music business.
Yes, he's a record producer, and so that's how he understands the youth market.
Correct.
And I think it's an allusion to him basically chasing skirts, right?
Exactly.
So then Ginger mentions that Annie was just spotted over at her and Kenny's place, and obviously Sid and Karen's ears perk up.
Right,
Like,
and
what?
then, of course, you see Karen is basically...
She's not having it. She makes
She's
an
not having
excuse,
it. Yeah.
and she goes right over to the house.
And she confronts Annie and basically tells her to get out.
Kenny immediately goes into this flirtation mode and tries to flatter Karen, and Karen's like,
Yeah,
no,
she's
not
not
going to work
having
on
it.
me, not going to work on me.
Right, and she basically issues a threat to him that Sid will beat him up and that Kenny's a good listener, handsome, but he won't be handsome anymore. Something to that
Right?
effect.
I thought that was
and I was
wild.
like, wow, yeah, I didn't expect that
Yeah.
to be so
this
threatening.
This is another one of those moments in the pilot where I'm like, okay, that's a little heavy-handed, but...
Well, listen, it just shows you she's not having any of this from Annie.
Okay, so we're back at the Avery backyard party, and this is where things really heat up because Annie comes in.
Yes, and this is definitely one of the juiciest scenes, I'd say, in this episode. What I liked so much was Annie seeing Ginger, and basically she says to her, I can't tell you how much better your husband made me feel,
It's
which is
crazy.
so outrageous.
It's
but,
so over the top to like just rub it in her face like moments after she had left her there.
but you can see, obviously, she is pretty much...
She's a hellion. She's a hellion.
She's a wild woman, and she doesn't care.
So basically, after that, Gary goes to ask Sid about that job at Knott's Landing Motors, and he does so without consulting Val. And then there's a cut to her face. You can see that she's very crestfallen that he did not consider her. And this is kind of a character moment or story moment that shows that maybe there's some cracks in the relationship that we haven't quite seen. So then Richard goes over to Annie, and he asks her if she'd like a drink, and she has maybe 2 sips, and she saunters over to that beautiful green, yellow, and white chair. And then she says what I think is the best quote of the entire episode. She says, I feel like running barefoot on the beach and then going into the ocean with all my clothes on and then coming out drenched and dripping and peeling off my clothes and rolling around in the sand until I'm covered like a breaded veal chop. A veal chop? What?
And
I
then,
guess that was on the menu at the, in the era, right?
maybe. And
So then she says, she throws it out to the entire crowd. Does anybody want to do that with me?
and then Richard says, sounds good to me.
Oh, God. So Annie tries to basically get anyone to come down to the beach with her. I mean, she's trying to get attention from anyone. And then Val is very sweet because she actually comes up to her and says, that sounds good to me, but why don't we go tomorrow, at a more like responsible time, right? And basically Annie just brushes her off, and
Right.
she goes up to all the men,
But you can see
You wanna
that
come? You wanna
Valine
come?
at that point is very much thinking about Lucy because they're about the same age, right?
Right.
Close
right.
in age. So she's missing Lucy, and you can see it on her face that like she wants to establish this connection
Right.
with
She's
Annie.
kind of missing that mother-daughter connection.
Well, the other thing I thought of too is that when I watched it, I also thought about this thing about Valine having the arrested development as well. Like I felt like she's so childlike, and we'll see it later. But again, she's in a way she might be on the same level as Annie too in her maturity.
Maybe a couple steps ahead of her.
Yeah, a couple steps.
Yeah.
But there is something about her. She's so green that you know, she's looking to make friends and like, yeah, okay, fine. Valene might have friends that are, you know, 20 years younger than her. I don't know.
Right. There's another comment I forgot to mention as we're looking at this picture here. Did you notice that Richard is smoking a pipe?
Oh, okay.
I love that.
No, I didn't
I
notice
love
that.
that. I don't think we see that again, but you never know.
So in the next scene, Annie and Diana come home drunk, driving in the family station wagon. And as they enter the cul-de-sac, they crash into another one of the Fairgate cars.
Almost hitting Gary and Val.
Yeah, they almost hit Gary and Val as they're leaving the party, and they crash the back of the car. So this is...
The girls are singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat in a round, if you didn't catch that.
Oh, yeah. So basically, you know, Karen is really, really angry. And at that point, she's threatening Sid that she's going to break up. So it's becoming really heated. This whole thing of having Annie there for the 2 weeks is just at a breaking point.
Did you notice that Sid actually spanked Diana? And that's when Karen said, Sid, you hit the wrong girl. You know, Karen's like, don't hit my girl, hit your girl. She caused all this. That was a bit wild. I mean, you certainly wouldn't see that probably.
Well, it still was the 70s. I mean, you know.
And Gary and Val are watching all of this, and they're getting an eyeful of, you know, what life on Seaview Circle could potentially be for themselves.
And you know what I noticed too? This is funny. It's a little bit of symbolism was that, you know, Annie had grabbed the hose and then she left it on the lawn. And then Sid comes up and he cleans it up. So it's like he cleans up the messes of his daughter.
Yeah. I love the line that Annie says when she's getting out of the car and Karen's furious. And Annie says, see, I don't just talk about things, I do them. What a petulant little lass. Oh my God. So yeah, there's basically an ultimatum given there. Karen says basically either she goes or Karen and the kids go, which is pretty wild. You know?
Yeah, I mean, definitely high drama, high stakes in this pilot episode.
Okay, so then we cut to commercial, the big dramatic cutting to commercial halfway through. Except we're not cutting to a commercial on this podcast. Instead, we are offering you our weekly segment that we're calling Untying the Knot. Get it?
Yes, so in this segment, we'll be taking a deep dive, albeit brief, into a specific production aspect of the series or perhaps a bio of a cast member.
For our premiere episode, however, we're not doing that. Instead, we're going to untie the knot that is us. Who are we? And why has the show resonated with both of us enough to watch it together twice already in its entirety? Actually, I've watched it 3 times. Again, my name is Brady, and I am a sometime writer, sometime actor, DJ, and purveyor of vintage oddities living in Los Angeles with my partner in crime and in life, Doug.
And that's me.
So I first watched this show as it was airing. Now, I was a young kid, and I certainly didn't watch every episode. I probably didn't watch this episode when I was a child because I was only, 4 or 5. But my parents watched this. I mean, at least my mother watched this show. I think she and my family, we had kind of watched Dallas off and on. I mean, the memories are kind of fuzzy. But basically, as Knots Landing came on, we would watch this on Thursday nights. And, again, even though we didn't watch every single episode, certainly as the years went on, I was into it. I got into it. And so even after my parents stopped watching it, I continued to watch it, like all the way through the end in 1993. And I think one of the things I liked about it was that it just felt so familiar to me because, newsflash, I grew up on a cul-de-sac. Now, I wasn't living in California. I was living in Illinois. But basically, the cul-de-sac was kind of the same. And if you think about it, my family lived in what would be called the Fairgate house. That's the positioning on the cul-de-sac. And so we knew the people next door. We knew the people across the street. And, via my mom, I did know some of the dramas that were going on in the neighborhood. Now, when I talked to my mom about this, she says, oh, please, nothing that was going on in that neighborhood was as dramatic as what was going on in Knots Landing. But in my mind, I wanted it to be. I wanted my mom and my dad and their friends to have this kind of wild life. That's what I envisioned even as a child. So I think that's kind of why this show resonates, is because
it feels so familiar and it feels so real. And even when the show gets crazy and there's more fashionable clothes and all, and more plot lines that are way more complicated, it still retains that element of reality. And that's what I think I like about it. What about you, Doug? What gets you jazzed up about Knots Landing to watch it all over again? And also maybe if you can tell us a little bit about who you are in your background.
Well, so for me, unlike Brady, I mean, I did not watch this when it came out. However, the weird thing for me is I also lived across the street from the cul-de-sac. So I can relate to that. I also lived, it's probably about 2.5 miles, 3 miles away from my house is that location. So I'm very familiar with the
original Seaview Circle.
Yeah, the original Seaview Circle, which is called Crystalaire Place, which is just off of Balboa. And basically that's pretty much the next town over, which, you know, as a kid and even teenage years, I mean, we would just go all over these places. I had friends that live in Granada Hills. So I know all these locations, the Knollwood Country Club. I mean,
we'll get to it.
So it's all very familiar to me. And then, I mean, as a secondary note, my dad was a TV director, so I was always very into television.
Could you maybe tell us what shows he worked on?
Well, he did a lot of sports stuff, but what was so funny is, as kids, what we were so excited about was when he took his first TV job in LA, he was working on The Bionic Woman.
Yes!
So season 3, so we actually went to the filming of like Bionic Woman. It was the Bionic Dog episodes, part 1 and 2.
I definitely think on this podcast, we are going to have to watch at least a few episodes of The Bionic Woman to find out how they gauge on the brow meter.
Totally. We need to do that. But anyway, going back to me. So my situation was I did not watch this show when it first came out, although I was probably of the age group where I could have watched it and understood it. But I know my sister watched it. So it's funny because when I've talked to her about watching it later on after, you know, Brady and I met in 2002, I think that's probably when I first watched it with you, at least a big portion of the series that was available.
Kind of available.
We'll talk about that later. But I basically am a quasi ex-musician DJ. I still do DJing as well. I'm a big lover of music. I did a music group in the UK back in the 90s. We released a couple albums. And then when I came back to the US, I took up real estate. So my full-time gig really is a real estate salesperson here in Los Angeles. So it is funny because I get to go to all these different locations where, you know, sometimes it's real fun to see filming locations.
I mean, that's definitely, I think, one of the things we appreciate too, and not just about Knots Landing, but any of these shows, is looking at the locations and seeing how they've changed or maybe not changed. And obviously we'll talk about that. We obviously were excited to do this podcast suddenly because Knots Landing is now available on streaming, finally on Plex. And so I will say that in regards to what we're doing right here, we're actually rewatching each episode on our own. So Doug and I are not watching them currently together. Then we will come together and discuss it with fresh eyes after not seeing it.
Yeah, and it is funny how, you know, I think when you watch a show, say, binging, you know, you can easily miss quite a lot too, because, you know, there's obviously other things going on, or, you know, you're going to make yourself a drink or eat some dessert or something like that. So it is kind of a great way for us to look at the show. I feel like you get so much more out of it, maybe more depth, messages. You know, so
you see how much more layered it is, I think, you know, when you're doing it this way. So I think we're really kind of already appreciating this in a new way. And plus, I'm excited about
as a vintage enthusiast as well, too. One of my things that really gets me off on any of these older programs are I just love looking at the set design and the fashions. Like that part is a big thing for me.
So we'll be geeking out on that a lot throughout the course of this podcast.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll enjoy that.
Okay, so we're back from commercial break, and Val and Gary are talking in bed. They are trying to figure out whether or not Knots Landing is a safe place to raise their daughter Lucy after what they've already experienced in a short time, right?
And you can see Val is absolutely freaked out. She said, "This is no place to start over."
By the way, this is actually Ted Shackelford's audition scene. I found out from the commentary. In this scene, he kind of confirms that he is in fact an alcoholic, which I guess probably if you'd already watched Dallas, you would have known that.
Doesn't he say, I know I can't drink?
Right. So that's kind of part of the problem here is that, Valine obviously just remarried him. She doesn't want him to go down the rabbit hole, right? So she doesn't want any sort of influences that could potentially put some stress on him that might make him go back to the bottle. So that's why she's so concerned. Gary reassures Valine that Lucy is not Annie, even though both of them kind of grew up without a father figure in their life. And he implores Val
give it a chance.
To give it a chance, yeah. To give Knots Landing a chance. All right. So then across the yard, basically.
Meanwhile, across the cul-de-sac, Karen tries to have a heart-to-heart with Annie in the middle of the night.
Wow.
But it backfires big time.
This is, of course, is classic Karen, right? She's meddling. She's trying to sort of solve the problem. With Annie, it ain't going to work. Okay? She ain't listening. She's young. She's defiant. And basically, Karen tries to say to her, I see through you. I see that you want to fit in. And
I like the line that Annie says. She goes, "Laundry's not her priority." That was like, okay.
Right,
and then it starts to get violent.
Right. So Karen not drags her. She follows Annie downstairs, but she basically embraces her and she kind of pushes her towards the mirror and says, look at yourself in the mirror. See who you are.
Right.
And how does she reply?
She takes something and
Candlestick.
She smashes the mirror.
Oh, it is dramatic. It is
7
dramatic.
years, bad luck.
Yes, and then she takes the candlestick and throws it at Karen.
Right, and misses.
And misses as Sid is coming down the stairs in his underwear.
Right.
Which, daddy alert here, daddy alert.
I thought it was funny that he was wearing his underwear too, because again, that goes back to this thing where in most TV shows, they never have that realistic aspect to it. He'd probably come down in his pajamas,
or a robe or something. He's wearing
Botany 500 pajamas. I don't know.
So it's a big dramatic scene, and once again, Annie flees, and then Karen and Sid argue, and basically, they go back upstairs, and Sid is putting on clothes, and basically he feels so put out again because he has a cold and he's sneezing this whole time, and he's so defiant. He says, "No, my visit with my daughter was going to be 2 weeks, and it will be 2 weeks. So if that means that I have to go to a hotel and stay with her, then that's what I'm going to do."
And then Karen, I love this. She says, "Does someone around here have some guts?" Which is like, wow, high drama.
Yeah, again, another commercial break moment here, okay? So after we return from this very dramatic scene, we see Valine on the bed, and she's taking a phone call. It's Annie, and she's in distress. So now this is kind of a juxtaposition, a lot of scenes in quick succession. Basically, Gary goes over to Karen's house, and she's in the process of vacuuming up the glass from the night before. Which again is just showing the reality of what people, go through. And then...
it's funny because he's all dressed up, which I thought was really funny, too. Because he's wearing like a suit.
Because he's going to go start his day
He's going to start working at Knots Landing Motors, which I thought was a little weird because, I've seen Sid wearing his, overalls with his name on it. Right. And then here's Gary all dressed up.
Like it's the first day of the job.
Yeah, but
right?
still, would you wear that to a car dealership? I guess maybe you would if you're selling cars.
Right.
I guess.
So I think they spot maybe Valine peeling off in her car, and then at the same time, Sid comes in, and I'm sorry, but when did Karen marry Columbo?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, he sure does look like Columbo there.
That 5 o'clock shadow. It was so obviously splotched on. That was.
Yeah. Well, basically, he apologizes to Gary
for not being able to take
him to work on the first day.
Yeah. So then we cut to a very interesting scene where Valine has gone to pick up Annie at the police department.
Jail.
And we find out
she's basically been detained for the possibility of being a hooker. Her excuse is that she was at a bar. She was at a bar and she was talking and she needed money. She just asked somebody for money and then...
Of course, it's an undercover...
It was an undercover cop. So she said she didn't do anything, but they arrested arrested her for soliciting.
And she also says that she called Valine because Kenny chickened out, which I thought was a funny
She called
moment.
Kenny first, but I guess he didn't want anything to do with it, or maybe he didn't take the call.
Did you notice where this police department was? I couldn't really make it out.
I did not. I couldn't recognize that.
I did notice, however, that because this was an exterior shot, they hadn't quite mastered, I guess, the sound, and so this was dubbed in clearly. And I think it was funny because Valine's Joan Van Ark's delivery of her accent was even more kind of strong in the, once taken to the studio to be re-recorded.
Annie said, "I thought I'd take a chance and call you.
Yeah.
Could I stay with you?"
It's sweet.
Sweet. So in a way, like, you can see that Valine is probably like, yeah, I can, help this woman. She's the age of my daughter. It's like replacing Lucy.
In a way, it's giving her a lifeline to Knots Landing, like something for her to do, a place where where Valine can belong and actually do something.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the next scene, because Valine basically says, "Oh, I know the perfect place for you, and really for me." And she takes her to the beach, because it was mentioned earlier in the episode that she had never seen the ocean before. She had never seen the beach in person.
And at this point, again, it goes back to, this is scene 18. So they're at the beach, and you can see the way that Valine is. She appears to be a child going to the beach. It's like, it's like being like a 6-year-old going to the beach.
Right.
And she's,
she's got to be close to 30 or something.
Yeah, and she's got her shoes off, and she's walking in the sand, and she's looking at the water, and she's super
jumping,
excited.
She's taking up her leg.
So, and I just thought that was
it's a beautiful scene, because you notice that the Knots Landing theme is kind of swelling and playing as she's doing this. And it really kind of, I think, is the moment where, as a viewer, you're kind of solidified into where we are.
And again, not to be a spoiler alert here, but the fact of the matter is, later on in the show, I don't even know how many times we see Valine jogging on the beach. Yes. But you find out that, like,
this is her happy place.
This is totally her happy place. Yeah. So this is the first time you see it.
And it's interesting because there's like kind of a part B to this scene where Annie, sees that Valine has already ran off in the surf, and she leaves her shoes and her purse. And there's a moment where Annie actually considers like stealing her keys and money and like taking off, but she doesn't. Yeah. And so she goes over to Val, who's like sitting awkwardly like a child in the beach. And then Annie says, why did you trust me? Why did you trust me? And basically, they sit down and they talk. She kind of finally opens up about her mother. And she reveals that her mother was like maybe kind of loony or something. And she was in a mental institution at some point in Philadelphia. And I think it's really interesting because as the episode progresses, I think Sid seems to think that it was Karen that got through to Annie in the end, but it really wasn't.
No, it was Valine. Val. Yeah, Valine is the one who's responsible.
And I don't want to spoil too much, but Valine has another relationship kind of like this as the show progresses, sort of a surrogate daughter for Lucy who isn't there, and that kind of starts up in season 2. Okay, so yeah, that was a really beautiful and powerful scene, I think. Followed by Annie and Val returning home to the cul-de-sac. And immediately there are fireworks because Karen and Sid are up, just going wild, like what's going on.
Right. They've been waiting for Annie to come back or find out what's going on. And Valine basically says that, she picked her up at the police department. And of course, Sid is very upset and concerned. And he says, why? And then Annie's just like so cheeky. She's like, oh, I was arrested for soliciting, for hustling, turning tricks. Right. I was just like, that is crazy. And then, of course, she says something to Karen to the effect that, like,
she was
weren't you?
Yeah, what did you call it when you were on the streets, honey?
Yes. I mean,
and then Sid Sid's had at that point.
Yeah.
So he finally slaps her on the face. And then what's interesting is that she just slaps him right back. And again, this is all in front of Valine, who's just like, what have I gotten myself into? So he tries to hug her, but she runs off. And then Karen and Val are kind of left there. And I think it's kind of nice because it's kind of their first real interaction here. And Val says to her, for what it's worth, I don't think she's guilty, right? I don't think she was, trying to hustle
right.
somebody.
She said, I don't think she did that.
And then Karen says something like, well, why don't we just say she's not guilty?
She's not. No, she said, she's innocent. Val said she's innocent. And let's just say she's not guilty.
Right,
which I thought was really clever.
That's it. Yeah,
that was a clever line.
Very clever. So then, I can't remember exactly, but somehow Karen goes off, and then we're left with Gary and Val. And basically, Gary's, Val's like, she's still unsure about living here in Knots Landing, but Gary says, he says this line, I've got to stop running. I've got to stop running. And I thought that was really funny. He's like, this is my last chance not to run. So then they go inside, presumably finally to unpack their boxes, hopefully, because they've never had a chance to do that yet.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't seen one thing going on except for that light bulb scene. That's about it.
So then finally we have Annie in the bedroom. I think it's like Diana's bedroom that she's in. And Sid comes in. And so they finally have a little heart-to-heart here.
Right. And he apologizes to Annie. And then you get a bit of backstory. And he's like, I owe you what I know. This family belongs to you. That type of thing. Do you know?
Yeah, and she doesn't really give him much, if you notice.
And he says, I don't owe you a slap in the face.
Right. So he's definitely, coming, he's definitely becoming a father finally, which up until now he was just kind of like this protector, and now he's actually being a father and actually kind of like admitting what the relationship had been up until that point. There's a really great moment after he leaves and she picks up this little stuffed animal and then she turns and there's a mirror there.
Right. She looks at her reflection in the mirror.
Finally looked at herself in the mirror, which she was unwilling to do the night before when she threw a candlestick in one.
All the symbolism. Oh my God. Who knew?
Okay, so then downstairs, Karen follows Sid back into the garage where she apologizes for meddling the night before. And it's funny because Sid says, actually, you were the one that got through to her, unknowing really what had happened at the beach with Val. And they embrace and they kiss.
Yeah, I mean, I did find it was a very fast kind of
forgiveness
apology, right? It happened very quickly. And then, of course, let's compromise. And so basically they end up going into the back of the old Chevy.
Oh, girl, and it's a joyride in the old jalopy.
Yeah, taking care of business, I guess. That's a way to kiss and make up.
And here's the thing. Let's flash back to that first scene, right? When Karen walks in and Annie walks down and Karen says, oh, what would have happened if the children would have walked in? Well, I say the same thing right now.
Yeah, they could have come into the garage.
What would have happened if the kids had come into the garage? Oh, jeez. Okay, so then we flip to outside of the garage. And this is really a nice little kind of encapsulation of David Jacobs' initial idea for this show, which is basically Scenes from a Marriage. Because we see next door Richard coming out of his house. He's wearing his tennis whites and he looks ridiculous. And he sees his wife trying to start the lawnmower, while he's going off to play tennis with his buddies. And she's having some trouble getting it started. So then he goes over there and he tries to start it. And then he rips the cord off the thing, which is just so classic.
Yeah.
And then it goes over to the Ewing house where Gary's painting, the last name on the mailbox. There was no other comments from Doug. Okay, I'll keep going. So then I think the garage door opens. And then Sid and Karen, joyride out.
Right, they joyride out in the 50s car.
Yeah. And then it was funny because if you remember, Karen sneezes, which shows that she is now
right.
caught.
She's got the cold.
Right,
I remember that was what
and
I was going to say.
Really, the pilot is like nicely closed out because
completely wrapped
where
up.
It started. It's the same shot going the other direction of the car going.
The funny thing, though, I'm going to say too, as something I noticed as well, and maybe it's I can't remember it being in the rest of the episode so much, but God, in this pilot, there's so much car activity in that cul-de-sac, and I know from living across from a cul-de-sac, it's usually pretty sleepy. There's never like 10 cars coming in. So.
I think there's a reason for that. I think the going in and out of the cars was really meant to show visually where each of the neighbors lived, because otherwise it'd be hard to kind of like get that connection. So I think that's what it was. I mean, we will see more cars later on, but I will agree there were a lot of cars. So that's the episode. And I think it was a really good, nicely crafted to get a lot of exposition in and also to introduce all the characters and also give some good looks into who these people are using the guest star. which was Karen Allen. What did you think about her and her character and her performance?
Oh, like I said before, now seeing this again, I really wish that they had brought her back because, she is just so good. She's such a good badass.
She has a great face. She gives really good face.
Yep.
The way she delivers a look or whatever, it says so much. And then, of course, they gave her such good lines as well.
You know what I'm kind of curious to know? I'm curious to know whether is this, how popular was she at that point? Because obviously she's done much bigger and better things. I wonder if this got her noticed.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think
role.
the thing is she had a couple, I looked at her IMDb and she had a couple of credits before this. But the next thing she did after this or that was released was actually the Al Pacino movie Cruising.
Oh, okay.
So I think she played like his girlfriend in that. I seem to remember. Again, it's been a while since I've seen that movie. But obviously the next big thing that she was known for was playing Marion in the Indiana Jones series. And, being Indiana Jones' love interest in that first Raiders of the Lost Ark, it was huge. That was such a huge movie. And I have to say, this is something that I maybe have never said to you, or probably I have. One of the
You had a crush on her?
No, I had a crush on Harrison Ford.
Oh, I know that.
So this scene kind of later in the movie when they're on the boat and he's been injured somehow, and Marion, Karen Allen, is like dressing his wounds and, touching his face and bandaging him up and kissing him gently. I mean, that's kind of how I know it was gay right there. So
he was jealous.
So I was jealous of Karen Allen, Marion. She would later appear in a couple other Indiana Jones movies as well, including the most recent one that we watched.
Yeah.
It was nice to see her. Again, it kind of gives you like warm feelings. But going back to what I was saying, like, her character in Knots Landing was not likable, but it was relatable because we know those people who will do anything to get attention, even stepping on other people's feet. And we know they do that because they didn't get that attention growing up. And I think that was addressed in the show and kind of showed why she was who she was. So I really liked her.
I was going to say to you, though, with regards to Patrick Duffy and playing Bobby, I didn't feel like his character did anything. It was very meh,
Yeah,
like it's just kind of like...
He was just there for exposition only.
Yeah.
And what was the other reason he's there for? He's there as a way to get the viewers from one show to the other.
But it was not that exciting, I got to say.
I think I had heard that originally they wanted Miss Ellie, right?
Oh, that would have been fun.
The mom to be the one, but I guess whatever, she wasn't available.
Miss Ellie was not available, so...
Okay, so what did you think was the best scene in that episode?
Well, and I kind of said this before, but still, my favorite scene was definitely the party sequence over at the Avery's.
Yes,
I
same.
loved it because it was just really campy.
It was campy, but it had great lines, but it also had heart to it because of the Valine moments. Every time you saw Valine, it showed how she was reacting to either Annie's craziness or her own husband, not willing to consult her before asking Sid for a job. So
and obviously that was a point where you're getting pretty much all the characers at once together
seeing the
too.
Players of this season and learning something about
The best
every
of
one
Knots Landing and one scene.
Yeah, it was great character development, and they used Annie as the vehicle to do that because she was able to say all these things to the main cast that each of them wouldn't have been able to because it would have seemed too rude. For example, when Annie asks Laura if she'd like to go down to the beach, Annie looks at her and she says, yeah, I guess grubby's not your style.
Oh, I love that. That was funny.
That was a real telltale moment about the Laura character. There's a lot more to Laura.
She's definitely a very deep. She's a deep. What do they say? Still waters run deep.
Yes,
she's the perfect example of that. But anyway, I think what's refreshing is when you watch this, it's like I just don't feel like they ever write things like this anymore. Everything always feels very
rarely do you get a scene with all these characters and they're all connected and they're all revealing something.
Yeah, but I mean, like in a modern television show, they would just never have too many campy lines like this either. It's just, I don't know. I guess maybe that's just down to David Jacobs and the way that he writes, but he's super talented, and it's just really refreshing to watch this because it's kind of somewhat entrenched in reality, even though it's not, and it gets very crazy, as we all know, so. Or we don't know.
Any other thoughts about this episode? Personally, I have some thoughts about this podcast pilot. Okay. Were certain scenes scripted? Yes. Was there a lot of exposition for us to get through? Yes.
Yes, there sure
Will our
was.
next episode have that? I hope not.
Hopefully not. But, this is an introduction. Again, this is our pilot episode. So we did kind of have to give you our mission statement going in.
Absolutely. And now, finally, we're coming in for a landing on this episode to get right down to the Lotus Point.
The Lotus Point? Isn't that the storyline that's still like seasons away?
Perhaps. But the Lotus Point is also our gauge of how lowbrow or highbrow a show, movie, or series ultimately is. So, Doug, what did you rate the premiere episode of Knots Landing on the brow meter?
Well, I actually think that this episode is pretty highbrow. That would be, I don't know if you want me to give it a number.
Yeah, 1 to 5.
1 to 5.
And you could do decimals. I'm good with
I'd
decimals.
say 4.5,
Oh, 4.5. You're way up there.
Yeah,
Okay,
I really
okay.
enjoyed it. And I thought it covered all the bases. It was everything about it was pretty tight as far as like storylines. Didn't give you too much fluff. Like everything that was in there was useful information that we needed.
It was
as
pretty
a viewer.
useful. It was pretty streamlined. Everything in there had a reason. I'm going to still give it a 3.75 for lowbrow, highbrow, because I do think there were some campy moments that felt a little uncharacteristic of the show in total. In other words, like every single time two characters got together, there was innuendo that they were going to sleep together. Like even Karen and Kenny, I mean, what?
Well, that's
So
a little
that brought it down.
far-fetched.
That brought down it for me a little bit, but yeah. So I guess that's around what, like a 4.25, and I think that makes sense. I do think that Knots Landing is going to be higher on the brow meter than lower, although there are definitely some episodes.
Oh,
that
yeah.
are-
Well, it depends on what season we're watching.
Oh, jeez. So I guess that's it, friends. A wrap on our inaugural episode of this podcast. If you like what you heard, we invite you to join the Seaview Circle. And you can do that by sending us messages via our Instagram. That's at Seaview Circle, all one word. Drop the A and put another E in its place.
Like C, like SEE.
Right, Seaview Circle. Or you can email us at seaviewcircle@gmail.com. Now, if we've gotten our act together by the time this premiere is published, we may also be on YouTube as well, where you will see screen caps from the episode. Whatever way, we'd love to hear your comments about favorite moments or quotes from the episode we've covered, or any memories you may have about watching the show from back in the day.
And if you have a question about the show's production or some behind-the-scenes story that you'd like us to investigate, please let us know, because maybe we'll feature the topic in the future called Untying the Knot.
Jules. Hey, Doug, shall we let them know what's coming next?
Sure. Next on Seaview Circle, Karen plays Mata Hari after the community protests JR's plans to drill for oil offshore at Knots Landing.
You did that exactly like the guy in the intro. I love
did
it.
try my best. Thank you.
Well, we'll see you then, or see you then.
Back on the sack.
Back on the sack.
That might be too rude. Back on the sack.